Welcome to this new webinar. My name is Marcela Bordon from the International Institute for Religious Freedom, and I'm going to give you some instructions about the way that we are going to interact in this webinar. In the webinar format, we are going to see and screen only speakers, and the way that audience can participate and interact with the speakers is through the Q&A box that you see on the bottom of the panel. And we invite you to send your comments, doubts, questions to each speaker, and we are going to read them at the end of the webinar and share the different answer and perspective of the speakers. So I'm going to be attentive to the Q&A box, and I'm going to invite to the floor to Janet F. Buckingham, who is going to be the moderator of the webinar. Welcome, Janet. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Marcella. And a warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us for this important topic of the No Road Home report on the situation of Christian IDPs, that's internally displaced persons, who are displaced by extremist violence in Nigeria. I note that not all the IDPs are Christians. 2 of the 3 sponsoring organizations are Christian, so that is the constituency we have focused on. The original idea for this report came from the advocacy teams from Open Doors International and the World Evangelical Alliance, as they were preparing a submission for the Universal Periodic Review process at the United Nations for Nigeria in 2023. They realized there was very little information and documentation of the situation of IDPs. They proposed putting together a team of researchers to visit IDP camps in Nigeria to conduct interviews. Out of that proposal came this report. There were some significant challenges to overcome. Many IDPs are in informal camps. They are trauma victims. Many have lost their land, their homes, and seen their family members brutally murdered. Some have been displaced more than once. It takes special interview skills to interview such people with sensitivity. It was also important to have both male and female interviewers. We are aware that men and women experience violence and displacement differently. They are each more comfortable sharing their experiences with an interviewer of the same gender. There is also risk associated with travel in these regions. There is trauma in listening to and recording the traumatic experience of IDPs. I want to take this opportunity to thank all the interviewers. The report is set in the context of an extensive literature review. This is the part of the report that I was involved with. It was very important to ensure that we included academic research from Nigeria and Nigerians, as well as analyses from global bodies. We're all aware that more Christians are killed in Nigeria per year than the rest of the world combined. We often refer to the conflict as being between farmers and herders, but there is much more complexity. I encourage you to read the Lit Review carefully to better understand the root causes of the violence. Extremist groups such as Islamic State, Al-Shabaab, and Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin are all active in this region. Banditry is common in the northern region. The presence of terrorist groups and bandits means that there's a proliferation of weapons. Historically, farmers, who are primarily Christian, and herders, who are primarily Muslim, had a collaborative relationship. Herders ran cattle on farms at certain times of the year, and that fertilized crops. However, agriculture has changed, and the herder population has grown. This means that herders need more land for their cattle. Farmers no longer need the cattle for fertilizer. This has resulted in ethno-religious conflict, exacerbated by the presence of Islamist terrorist groups and the abundance of weapons. Fulani herdsmen are now supplied with AK-47s. They now wish to occupy land formerly owned by farmers in order to run larger herds of cattle and they're not afraid to remove the farmers to do so. Many in the West have not wanted to delve into the complexities of the conflicts in Nigeria, often just labeling it a conflict over scarce resources. There is no question that Nigeria's population has been growing. It has approximately doubled in the last 25 years, and the median age is 18. But there are many factors in the violence that has displaced thousands of people. The report concludes with a number of recommendations for action. These are based on the findings of both the literature review and the interviews. If other speakers do not address the recommendations, I will come back to them at the end of their presentations before we have our Q&A time. I am very pleased that we have 3 speakers from Nigeria with us today that were involved in the interviews in Nigeria. I will hopefully quickly show you the map of where the interviews took place. Someone else may also have this map, but just in case, it's helpful for you to see the IDP camps where the interviews were taking place. So you can see that they were in Plateau State and Borno State in these 2 different regions. So there's a variety of experiences. So I will first turn to John Samuel, who is Open Doors legal expert for Sub-Saharan Africa. John was instrumental in organizing the interview team. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Janet, for a very good introduction. Hello to every participant. I have a few slides to present to you, the findings of the research report. I will share my screen now. Let me know if you can see my screen.
I give you the permission to share your screen.
All right, thank you. I'll do that now.
Okay.
Thank you, Marcella.
Great.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it.
Excellent. Thank you. So I think without further ado and a lot of introduction, Janet has already made a very good introduction to this. I will proceed to the details of the report. So this is a joint effort by Open Doors World Evangelical Alliance and International Institute for Religious Freedom. Thank you all for organizing this webinar as well. It is based on this research report titled No Road Home. It essentially tells the story of Christian IDPs displaced by extremist violence in Nigeria. Just by way of introduction, I'd like to say a few things. One is Nigeria is among the top 10 countries in the world in hosting internally displaced persons. That is, I think, very important fact. So displacement is quite widespread in many parts of the country, and specifically because of violence of extremist groups, and specifically this research addresses internal displacement caused by violence of Islamic militant group and other radicalized groups. So that is one important fact, the fact that there is a widespread violence which has led to displacement in Nigeria. The second important point worth noting is Open Doors International publishes every year the ranking. It is called World Watch List, which is an annual ranking of countries where it is very dangerous to live as a Christian. According to this ranking, Nigeria is 7th in 7th place according to 2025 World Watch List ranking. That is the 7th most dangerous country for Christians to live. In the previous year, the same ranking ranked Nigeria at a 6th place, which was even worse than it is the 2025 ranking. So this overlap of, the overlap of these two phenomena is one of the main motivations for us to embark on this research, to see what is the lived experience of Christians and the persecution of Christians in Nigeria, and specifically in displacement context. One more thing, the research also concentrates on the experience of Christian IDPs. We all understand Nigeria is religiously diverse, and there are Christians, Muslims, and people who follow other faiths. But because of the ever-increasing violence against Christians, the targeted violence against Christians, we decided to focus on the experience of Christians. This is entirely based on research of our organization, the partners in this research, and our partners on the ground about the experience of Christians in Nigeria. So the focus is on the experience of Christian IDP. So the objective is really to examine how religious affiliation shaped the experience of internally displaced Christians in some of the most affected regions of Nigeria. The pictures that you see in the background of my slide is an actual footage of an IDP camp in the north central part of Nigeria in Plateau State. All the pictures, just for information, are all real footage of internally displaced persons from the displaced areas. So, does religious affiliation play any role in the targeting of Christians and in their displacement experiences? Kind of the fresh contribution that this research is making. When I'm saying this, maybe it is very important to note two things. One is, we are not denying that violence in Nigeria, mainly perpetrated by Islamic militants like Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa province in the northeastern part of Nigeria, and by radical Fulani militants in the north central part of Nigeria, is not affecting only Christians. Of course, it affects non-Christians as well. But we believe that, and our research of so many years indicates that there is a deliberate targeting of Christians in both regions or both regional states that we are addressing through this research. So Christians have a double vulnerability compared to people from other faith groups. However, it is important to acknowledge that the violence has also affected people from other faith groups. That is one. The second one is, it's also important to acknowledge or recognize the complexity of the problem, especially when we speak about the cause and the drivers of the violence in Nigeria, in the areas covered by this research or elsewhere. We don't want to attribute, or we don't believe religion is the only reason or the only cause for the violence and for the displacement. However, it has been religion or religious affiliation has not been factored in the predominant narrative, as Janet was explaining earlier, in existing researches and predominant narratives. So we are saying the situation of Christian IDPs is specifically exacerbated because of their faith affiliation or their religious affiliation. So, climate issues, resource clashes, those might have also contributed, but we are saying we don't also have to forget the role that religious affiliation plays in the violence and in the experience of displacement. So, in a way, this is the main significance that this research is bringing to the discussion. So, how does religious affiliation plays in the violence in these selected areas? It is qualitative research, mainly adopted to get an in-depth or detailed information about the lived experience of the IDPs. We have used semi-structured interviews and focus group discussions were carried out in 2 phases between January and April 2024, conducted both in Hausa and in English. These focus group discussions were divided into 7 categories. I think this is also important to mention. There were camp authorities, internally displaced persons, formal and informal camp leaders and authorities were put in one focus group discussion. There were religious leaders, denominational leaders in one group, community leaders and elderlies above the age of 50 were put in one focus group discussion. We have contacted humanitarian agency workers. Local government authorities were also put in one focus group discussion. Women with children is another focus group discussion, and the youth were participants of this research. So altogether, 2,092 people were interviewed, and the IDPs that were interviewed were exclusively Christians. Probably this could be one of the limitations which begs for further research. It can be widened and more accurate information can be captured if people from other faith group are also included as research participants. Janet has already brought up the map of Nigeria. It is just to let you know the geographical location of the researchers. So 2 local government areas, two regional states were selected. One is Plateau State, which is found in the middle of, in the north central part of Nigeria, also referred as the Middle Belt, and the other one is found in the northeastern part of Nigeria. It is called Borno Regional State. And in these 2 regional states, we have identified 2 local government areas, that is where from the research participants came. In Plateau State, Bassa local government area and Mangu local government area were covered. And in Borno, internally displaced persons and other people were interviewed from Ningala local government area and Goza local government area. If you might be wondering why we chose these 2 regional states, there is something behind that, and maybe it is very important to highlight that. Through years of experience, research, and monitoring the situation of Christians and other human rights conditions for that matter in Nigeria, we have identified 5 major drivers of violence, hence drivers of internal displacement in Nigeria. One is, of course, the violence by designated Islamic militant groups or designated terrorist groups like Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa province. So violence caused or facilitated by these groups is one of the drivers. The other one is violence caused or facilitated by Fulani militants, mainly in the Middle Belt or the north central part of Nigeria. Those are also other drivers of violence in Nigeria. In the northwestern part, it is predominantly sheer banditry, armed robbery, and things like that. It also has its own contribution. And mainly it is motivated by ransom money and not entirely or primarily motivated by religious affiliation. Of course, the Nigerian security forces attempt to curb the violence, especially by Boko Haram and ISWAP, has also caused some kind of displacement. And of course, the last one is displacement caused by climatic changes, droughts, flood, and things like that. So when we look at these drivers and the contribution that this research or the objective of this research being to bring the phase lens in analyzing the overall situation in Nigeria, we found Borno and Plateau State to be the exact fit. In Borno, both ISWAP and Boko Haram operate, and there is also some operation by the Nigerian security forces to curb that. In Plateau State, it is predominantly perpetrated by Fulani militants. So these two regional states and the 4 local government areas were selected to identify what is the role of phase or religious affiliation plays in the targeting and violence, and hence in the displacement. So 3 key findings. They are seen, you can take them as key findings or also as a lens through which we come to conclusion. One is focused on what is the driver of the displacement in the first place? Why are people targeted? Why are people violated in different ways, sometimes in extreme ways from the start. Why are people leaving their house and their ancestral lands, their village, their families? So the targeting itself is one important element that needs to be taken into account. The second one is then after they are displaced, what does their experience look like? Does phase play any role after they have been displaced? That is the second one. And the last one is, why are they still staying in the IDP camps? Why are not they, going back to their ancestral lands? So drivers of displacement, key findings are around drivers of displacement, experience in displacement, and risk of return. So the first one is targeted violence against Christians and a failure of the state security forces to protect Christians and other civilian communities has resulted in a mass internal displacement, both in Borno and Plateau State. Violence by ISWAP and Boko Haram essentially is motivated by the nature of the groups themselves. Boko Haram leaders, in one of their addresses to the public, for instance, have said they have officially declared jihad over Nigeria, and their objective is to Islamize the entire nation. And hence, in that framing of the issue, they put Christians, which they refer them as infidels, as one of the enemies. Therefore, they either want them to renounce their faith and join Islam, otherwise they are targets of the violence. In Plateau State, in similar ways, Fulani militants who are often, equipped with military-grade weapons, are targeting predominantly Christian village and communities across many regional states in the north central, in this specific case, Plateau State. And they are killing people, abducting people, raping people, targeting church members, destroying their livelihood, their farmlands, their religious leaders, etc. So in the first place, these Christian IDPs are targeted because of their religious affiliation. The second one, experience in displacement. After they have been displaced by the violence, one, there is inadequate and poor distribution of humanitarian assistance or resources. And the interesting finding is that faith plays a role, and Christians are often discriminated in distribution of humanitarian assistance in their IDP contexts. In Borno State, when Christians are displaced from Ngala and Goza, they fled to the neighboring village towns and mainly to Maiduguri, the capital city of Borno State, where they became a minority, and they were essentially excluded from services, access to education, access to food, shelter, and basic security in the host community and in the IDP camps as well. So faith has played a role in that. I will give you one or more details in the next slide under each one. Risk of return. Again, faith increases the level of risk for displaced Christians to try to return to their home, in Borno and Plateau State. Either the attackers are still living on their ancestral lands or on their properties that they have left, or there is a high risk of ambush and abduction on their way or in their attempt to go back to their home and ancestral land. So the key findings are faith has played an important role both in the targeting of the IDPs from the start, in their experience as internally displaced persons, and afterwards in the attempt to return to their ancestral land. They have been targeted because of their faith. I think I have already covered this. Let me just give you a quote of one of the research participants from Goza. He says, "Since the attack and the destruction of church in Goza, I have not returned, and the churches are still in their deplorable state since their destruction." One of the participants told us, the first time their villages were attacked was in 2014, and we are now in 2025. There has been no solution. They have been in IDP camps since ever. So one of the research participants retells, their story of horror, saying, between February and May 2014, Boko Haram attacked their village 6 times, and there has been no military interventions there. And each time killing 7 to 10 people. So they were forced to flee, their village. Let me also quote from one of the interviews from Mangu local government area in Plateau State. He said, when the Fulani gunmen, Fulani militants came to attack, they would be heard shouting, Allahu Akbar, we will destroy all Christians. Pastor spoke about the attack on Miango that happened on the 3rd of August 2021. And he says, Fulani militants numbering up to 300 attacked the entire community during the burial of a local community member. The pastor stated that the military moved to support the Fulani militia, leaving the youths to attempt to defend the community. Farmland was destroyed, and the church in Tafigana was burned down. 2 weeks later, the attackers returned, destroying buildings they missed in the first attack and killing people, including 5 members of the church. The attackers also ambushed people on their farms, launched attacks on roads, and abducted people. They burned down houses, destroyed crops, stole properties, killed animals, forcing people to flee, from their house. Most fled to the nearby community where they could find friends or relatives. Others settled in the nearest school building or church that they felt safe in. They remained displaced because their security could not be guaranteed, despite the presence of some soldiers. So this tells you whenever both in Borno State, Boko Haram and ISWAP, and Fulani militants in the Plateau State, when they arrive in predominantly Christian communities, they first target religious institutions like churches, then go for their religious leaders, and then kill everyone indiscriminately. So people are forced to leave. This picture again that you see in the background of this slide is an actual footage of existing IDP camp in Plateau State. Experience during displacement. Let me just quote one of the interviews from Goza local government area. This camp is, there is no adequate facilities, there is no adequate provision of humanitarian support, basic supports in this camp. And this is one of the campuses within the church compounds, these pictures that you are seeing. Because the government, the IDPs who were in some of the IDP campus that the government said still face discrimination. So they decided to move to the places where they feel safe, which is the church. So the church had to provide whatever it has to host these people. Unfortunately, the government is saying those people, internally displaced people who are living within the church compound, are not recognized as internally displaced persons. The camps are not also recognized. Therefore, any kind of humanitarian assistance coming through the state government is not distributed for thousands of IDPs that are being hosted in the church, which is a clear phase-based discrimination during a distribution. This is one of the participants, the research participants said. White paper cards used were distributed as a license to receive humanitarian assistance by the state government, were deliberately withheld from Christian IDPs. Sometimes cards were given to community leaders to distribute, but usually Muslim community leaders who would then bypass Christians. So that is the situation of the Christians even after they are displaced. This is overwhelmingly confirmed by participants of the research. In Plateau State, the experience of IDPs in displacement settings was not primarily affected by their religious affiliation. Maybe this is one of the key differences to the findings from Borno. In Borno, it is because of religious affiliation, but in Plateau State, it is shaped by the distinct lack of attention to the area by humanitarian assistance. For instance, the International Organization for Migration reported that there are a little over 54,000 internally displaced persons hosted in communities in Plateau State. However, other sources, for instance, a local development association called Mwagavul reported that more than 103,000 internally displaced persons are currently in Plateau State, which is 80% more than what IOM is reporting. So that definitely needs a further investigation. So the presence of humanitarian assistance in Plateau State is really, really minimal, which is not much compared to the need. when we look at the risk of return, like I said, there is high risk of abduction because of religious affiliation and violent targeting during and after attempted return. Properties and possessions are destroyed, or they are mostly in possession of the attackers, which makes it again risky for the IDPs to return to their ancestral lands. And no or minimal protection is given for these IDPs who would prefer to, return to their lands. We have heard so many testimonies from the participants saying one of the IDPs who tried to go back to his land just to check or maybe to work on his land has been killed. This has been, testified by many of the research participants or the interview. So returning to their ancestral lands is also extremely risky. Borno State, one of the research participants said, the interviewee said, if they are returning, some of the people that are staying on their land are actually informing on the members of the extremist groups, Boko Haram and ISWAP, to come and check on the Christians who are trying to return to their land. They will either ask them to renounce their faith and come to Islam. If not, they will kill them, or they will be forced to go back to the IDP camps. So it is a very dangerous situations for the internally displaced persons, Christians in this case, return back to their land and homes. So in conclusion, what we want to say, I will leave the recommendations part for Janet maybe later. What we can say is faith affiliation plays a key role in the experience of Christian IDPs in Nigeria, in the targeting after the displacement, and also in their attempt to return to their land and homes. And the research also gives some recommendations. One is, of course, in the area of urgently increasing humanitarian assistance. That's very important, especially in Plateau State. The nature of the Plateau community, who are predominantly farmer community, they are essentially disconnected from their livelihood, and they are mostly hosted within the community, and they are not set up in specific campus. So that might make it or might appear that the need is not that great. But when you look at the figures and the desperate situation that people are living in, there is a very high or a dire need of humanitarian assistance in Plateau State, the same in Borno State, specifically in the IDP campus that the government refuses to recognize. Implementing and enforcing the national policy for displaced persons, which Nigeria government has not taken any concrete measures in terms of implementing this policy. We have also suggested, the research also suggested establishing an international commission of inquiry. This is primarily because of the widespread impunity. No one has been held accountable, both in Borno and in Plateau State, for all this violence and killings that are happening every now and then. The recent attack, most of you might have heard this, last year, the Christmas attack in Mangu local government area was an attack over a series of days in more than 60 predominantly Christian communities. Nobody is held accountable. So impunity is widespread. Therefore, there needs to be some kind of investigation into the ongoing impunity and injustice in Plateau, Borno, and other parts of the country. Adopting and implementing the national policy for addressing impunity, again, it is related with that. Removing illegal small arms. We also call upon the Nigerian government to show greater commitment on this, because the Fulani militants are, coming with AK-47. There is no way that the Christian communities, who are mostly unarmed, except traditional weapons like sticks and machetes, they always overpower them. They just kill them. The only hope they have is either to die or, leave their village and area. Leveraging the public trustworthiness of the church and Christian leaders, this is also very important, especially in Borno State. The IDPs told us, if you want any kind of humanitarian assistance to reach us, please do it through the church. The church is the first responder to the problem and still one of the hopes for the IDPs. And the church is extremely straight and still trying to do what it can to mobilize resources and to meet the needs of the internally displaced people. This is one of the residents of Manku local government area. He's just looking at the destruction after the attack of Fulani militants in his village in 2023. Thank you for your attention. This brings me to the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much for that very informative and good overview of the report. Next, I will invite Reverend James Akinyele, who is Executive Secretary of the Nigeria Evangelical Fellowship. And I invite you to give your comments and impressions of the report. The NEF is the National Evangelical Alliance in Nigeria, so is our local WEA partner. Pastor James, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Prof. Thanks you, sir, for the summary of the report. And I would like to know if I'm being heard, if I'm audible enough.
Yes, we can hear you well.
All right. I would like to quickly, start by saying thank you for making this possible, Prof, and all the other stakeholders. On the note of appreciation, thank you for the interest of all the believers who share in these ongoing and painful narratives. I have interacted with the report, and I'm privileged, like you will know, that I was part of the team with one of our volunteers who participated in this report. So I cannot agree less with the summary. I think in terms of quick response, it's important that the role of, that we're highlighting, or this report or this research highlighted the place of religion in the ongoing crisis, along with all the factors, economy, ethnic, resources, and all those. I think we can't logically talk about persecution of the church without this important emphasis. And while it's often said religion is one of the factors, I think my first feedback would be, actually, it's not just one of the factors. The Nigerian story is that religion is a major factor. Other factors only further complicates it. And the second, I will stop on that. If I'm asked to, I can emphasize that. The second feedback I would like to give, following my appreciation on that point, is that this is the fact that we still have this problem on ground. The persecution, the attacks are still going on. The displaced people still remain in that condition described in that report. And in some cases, it's actually worse. Between that research in February 2024, and now I've gone to a couple of other displaced communities on behalf of the Alliance. And the situation is getting more and more precarious because, like the report highlighted, there is attack, or there are attacks even within the makeshift places where people gather for basic survival. So the plight is not just a report of what happened. Sorry, the report is not just reflecting the plight of what happened, it's capturing what is still going on. The third I would like to quickly say is the need, therefore, to transit between the facts presented by the research into triggered actions. Thank God for the organizations, I wouldn't want to mention names, we know them, who are already involved in some kind of humanitarian, series of humanitarian assistance and intervention. Part of what we pick during that research is the frustration of having to go through this interview, participate in meetings, participate in discussions. But for people who are orphaned, who are widowed, for widowers, for people who live with disability because of attacks on them, for people without shelter, without basic survival kits, and without a guarantee of security, the research is just for them a paperwork, as important as we know it is. The research is, and it's going to, and the long-term impact that this will create for a man. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of need still plays a very significant response. I've received calls from some of those persons and communities we interacted with, even though Open Doors and all the team made it very clear, this visit is a research visit. We want to gather information, we want to know what is going on, we want to strengthen advocacy capacity. But people are hungry, people are insecure. Children, as I'm talking, we've had to create an orphanage home between last year and this year to be able to pick up some of the children, some of the victims, just to start somewhere. So I think that requires further and immediate, I call it practical action. Research should trigger more of these actions that directly bears on the victims. I was honest enough to actuations, even the minimal top echelon of the displaced community, and those who are not, are also taking advantage of that situation, either because of people's selfishness or because of sheer survival instinct. We have a case in one of our where a young man was denied, was able to get a mattress in the displaced community, and he was asked to drop it because on the link priority, on the list of priority, survivor, and because he was alone, he wasn't entitled to get the mattress. And I remember him speaking. We heard him say, so even the loss of my family has become a disadvantage to me, in tears. But because you can come in, because the resources are minimal, and the people also want to, including those who are not displaced, I am sad to say, but who have access to some of these resources. Sometimes there is what we have captured as victim-to-victim form of exploitation. And lastly, I would like to, last but one, I would like to say that the church in Nigeria has been stretched, especially in the Middle Belt and the North. You will see, we will still see some level of opulence and convenience within the church in the South, but the kidnapping, the terror attack is already spreading southwest, south, southeast, and southwest. I'm sad to report that there are displaced communities in those regions already, especially under the indifference or maybe involvement of the last administration. So the church in the north has been stretched beyond its resources because you have to respond, like the report said, you have to house people. You manage to rebuild the church, it is brought down again. If the ancestral land of the worshippers had been taken over, they can't farm, and majority of them live on those resources. So they fall back on the church for survival. And most of the churches and their leadership don't have the resources to even meet those basic needs. We can feel it as an alliance because the churches also are finding it difficult to cope as organizations, so they can't even think of a collaborative effort. And lastly, the last thing is what we have discovered locally is the need to bridge the South-North gap in terms of the crisis we're dealing with. Having said the last point I made, there is still a large gap between the country as a whole in the South and the church in the South. The reality of the fact that we are waging a jihad, or we are under a jihad, an Islamic war, the fact that it is not being said in public sphere. And until recently, the church in the South probably thought it was a joke. I am from the South, but I've lived a chunk of my life and ministry life in the North. So one of the things we're hoping to develop capacity for this year as an alliance, coming from this research, is to be able to pull the leadership of the church and the faith community in the South, and where possible, even the Muslim leadership, to present this kind of report, this kind of facts in more practical way, in such a way that they also can say, we can open up a dialogue on how first the church in the South can deploy part of the resources to help the North, and how we can prevent the escalation of this crisis spreading further into the South. That's one of our priorities as we mark one of our priorities as an alliance as we celebrate the 60th year of the Evangelical Fellowship. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you so much for those reflections. It's very helpful to hear your perspective and to get, really a bit more update because the research for this report was done last year, and so to get some more current. And I think we'll come back to you in the Q&A because people have already asked about some very current situations, so we'll come back to that. Finally, we have Barry Gastor, CEO at Rural Youth Integral Support Initiative in Plateau State. Barry will be sharing from his personal perspective and experience. Barry, the floor is yours.
I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Are you able to hear me well?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Yes, we can hear you. Where's the copy?
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm grateful for all the insights and all the research presentations that have been made. In my own area, I am from Plateau State, from Basa local government. The experience we have had with the attacks started way back in the year 2001. This is a quarter of a century this year. When it started, it was like testing the waters. It was like testing how Christians will react should there be an attack massively. So for 15 years, there were ambushes, the number of people killed was not too high. And it was in 2016, precisely December 31st, New Year Eve, that they went into a community and one night they slaughtered 34 people. It was at that point in time that it dawned on the Christians in our community that, hey, this past 15 years, these little attacks that we had been having, has gone beyond herder-farmer clash. Before the year 2000, there were always conflicts between Fulani herders and farmers, but this was settled amicably by both leaderships. But beginning from 2016, it assumed an entirely new dimension. So between 2016 and 2021, the attacks escalated. In fact, in 2021 alone, 44 communities from my own area were ransacked and displaced. They would come in their numbers, well armed, just as Reverend James had said, and burn down whole communities, kill those that they were able to kill. And for those that were injured, some of them, as we are talking now, have become incapacitated and unable to provide for their families. So in the last 25 years, in my area, we have lost a total number of 1,105 people as at this year. We have 454 widows. Some are in their early 20s. In fact, we even have some that are about 18, 19 years, and they have become widows. We have had 2 rape cases. We have had over 20,000 residential rooms that were burnt down, and over 27 farms that were destroyed. So the impact has been much, both on our communities and individuals. Out of the 64 communities that came under attack, 15 are still displaced. We are not sure when they will be able to return to their ancestral homes. And even those that have gone back, they are constantly living in fear. It might interest you to know that the community where I come from is less than 2 kilometers away from a major military base in the country. So when that community came under attack, it went for 2 weeks unabated. And then the government was silent. There was nothing, there was no response. So until all such communities were displaced. We think that the government has not done enough to curb this. There are 3 persons that were highly affected by these attacks. There's a widow whose name is Lisa Ishaya from Ancha community. The night that the militants went to their community, she lost 7 family members. She lost her husband because it was a polygamous family. She also lost her maid, whom she was married to her husband. She lost 4 of her children and several other family members. As I'm talking to you now, with all the trauma healing programs that she has attended, she has still not fully recovered yet. And then just to agree with Reverend James, that religion is a major factor in all that has been happening. There is a Fulani man in our community who is a Christian. He has been a Christian for many years. And all his children are also Christians. Actually, one of them grew up to become a pastor, and he was organizing and coordinating Fulani Christian conferences for the whole of West Africa. So they killed this pastor who is a Fulani. They killed one other son. The Fulani man had 3 sons. The youngest is still alive, but they're still after him. And often they'll call and say, we are coming for you, no matter where you go to. Now that you have embraced a different faith, now that you're no longer with us, we are coming after you. So religion is a major factor. In our community, we have lost not less than 14 pastors who were attacked and killed. One pathetic case was one of the pastors, an Equa pastor, who was killed, and his wife. They left behind 6 children. The youngest at the time they were killed was still a teenager. No, the oldest was still a teenager, and the youngest was just about 2.5 years. So you can imagine suddenly they have become orphans, and that was how their father's ministry ended. So there are a lot of testimonies, of people who were highly impacted. As I said, 15 communities have not gone back to their ancestral homes yet. And when such attacks lasted, schools had to close. So you can imagine that other parts of the country have their children attending schools, but in our own area, for several months, they'll be out of school. Even when the attacks subsided, you find that children had already lost interest in going to school. And plus, there are a lot of schools that were burnt down completely. Health facilities were burnt down completely. And several churches were burnt down completely. Reverend James Akinyele, mobilized his people. They came for an outreach in our area. And the number of people that came out for that outreach, was a very clear indication that the displaced people were really, really needy and needed attention. And most of the support that we received, 90% of the support that came in, came from church and parachurch organizations. That of the government and its parastatals was less than 10%. So it means that the government did not only fail in doing enough, to curb the attacks, but in terms of reaching out to the displaced people with relief materials, not much came in from the government. It was the church that was there to support people. So while the attacks lasted, the church did not only bring relief materials, there were medical outreaches to help people that were sick. In our own case, we have never had a single IDP camp because our people believe that what affects one affects all. So families opened their doors to absorb displaced families or displaced people. In a single home, one could find as much as 27 people that they are hosting, or even more than that. But we have been through a lot. Now, the climax of our attacks was in 2021, talking of massive attacks where whole communities would be displaced. But in 2022, beginning from 2022 till date, we have noticed that there is a change in trend. They no longer attack communities massively. What they're now doing is to freely graze their cattle on crops that have been planted. And from our records, it's clearly seen that they do that mostly in the third quarter. At that time, crops have already grown. Any crop that is destroyed at that point in time cannot grow back. So that's their way of bringing in hunger to cause famine among the people. In our area presently, most people did not harvest anything at the end of the cropping season. So people are really, really suffering. Just as Reverend James had said, it is good that we have statistics. It is good that researches are made, but the needs that are on ground, they are real. People are actually hungry. People are really, really suffering. So this is the testimony we have from our own end. And I have lived almost entirely in my community. Even when the attacks lasted, I never left the community, so that just I'll be there for the people. I am also a farmer. I do a lot of farming, and predominantly because since I'm a key figure, I know the displaced people always come to me. And sometimes when support are not forthcoming from other quarters, when they come and say, the last time we ate was like 2 days ago, I have no option than to go to my own store and give out the food I have. Like last year, I had about 35 bags of maize. I didn't sell even one bag. It all went to the displaced people. So there is great need on ground. And so we are praying that as the world hears this, that support will come to displaced people. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank
Hello,
you
are you there?
Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing from your on-the-ground experience, and we want to stand with you in these very difficult circumstances. I want to turn to some of the questions that have been posted in the Q&A. If you have questions, please write them in the Q&A section. And the first question is, and I think I'm going to direct this to you, Reverend James, have you noticed any impact with the US government cutting US aid? Was there very much of that funding that was coming and being used to support IDPs in Nigeria?
When the current administration, the US, took that decision, I can tell you people I know who has been out of job, who were out of job immediately. Those who were attending to and who are responding to some of these humanitarian issues, AIDS. I know one, eventually one was called back. One was called back for 40 days but that after 40 days, they are not sure. Is it 40 or 90 days? They are not sure if they will be retained. So there is a direct, that's even in terms of a few people who are involved in responding to the impact of some of these issues. Now, I've also, because we also relate with a few other organizations, the major statement I've had from some of them had been, this year is unpredictable because of these developments in the US. So the answer would be yes. The long-term impact we can't predict yet, but certainly it's hitting the ground and we're feeling it. And may I also say that when we talk about displaced displaced people and displaced Christians in particular, there are people who are not displaced, but who in some places are displaced because part of their own experience, especially on the plateau, is because when their family members had to flee the communities, they fled to Jos. They ran to the neighboring towns. So you can have a household that usually was 4 or 5, now becoming 10 or 12, because they are by blood or by proximity related, and you can't see them on the street and not house them. So it means those families to have to get the brunt of. And there are believers, we might say, who work with some of those humanitarian organizations. There is this whole fear of losing their jobs because some of the intervention that the local church, the faith community had been able to mobilize come from some of those brethren who also work there. So when they're out of job, they also become limited in what they can do. So that would be my response. We are having immediate impact, and it's likely going to increase.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. I'm going to turn now to John for an answer to John Bainbridge, who asks, can we understand how the IOM stats are underestimating the true state totals of IDPs? Is there anything to be said about the duration of displacement? And he says he believes some agencies distinguish IDP from internally displaced and count accordingly, the latter being freshly displaced. John, would you have an answer to that?
Yeah, I think that's very important question. We may not have all the answer from the findings of this research and the report that IOM has published, but definitely it is something that needs further investigation. This report that we have quoted on our research was published by IOM, I think in 2024, March 2024, to be specific. And the report mentions that the registering IDPs or counting IDPs found not only in Plateau, but in other regional states in Nigeria started in September 2023, and it went on until December 2023. That is the time frame that was referred in this research. But either way, what the association, Gavul Association reported 103,000, more than 103,000 could be, a little longer than the time that IOM has used, December to September 2023. But some of the IDPs that they included in the report have also captured, the recent attacks. So what I can say, first of all, is therefore, it is very important to see into the methodology of both reporters. But from our observation and from the scale of the problem, even if we can't put it scientifically, the scale of the problem is definitely more than what has been depicted in IOM's report. That is one. The other one is probably, as Reverend James rightly mentioned earlier, when you look at the culture of the Plateau State, it's not common for internally displaced people to be gathered in, a space. They might have, there could be a location like a school or something, but oftentimes, for instance, if you go to the IDP camps that we have visited during the daytime, you might find quite few people. They will go out either to work on the lands of other people or go to acquaintances, to look out for resources. But there is a large scale of community hosting when it comes to the North Central Nigeria in general, because of the inherent culture of the society. So that might also have contributed to the mismatch in number, which is huge. So that also needs to be taken into account. So the two things I think worth for further investigation. I know this is not an accurate answer, but this could be the possible reasons.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. You will see that I have I've posted in the webinar chat a link to the report itself, and sorry, I just knocked my computer over. I encourage people to go and read the report. There's quite a bit more detailed information there. I think we do have time to answer, and I think it's important to answer the question. I'm going to combine them, the one that Hans and the one that Jane put in about what governments have diplomatic leverage with Nigeria, and how to influence the Nigerian government to take more action on this. Reverend James has turned off his camera, but I'm hoping that he can help to answer that question.
I'm trying to,
and I will let him
I'm
answer
trying
the
to do
question
that.
on Nigeria first, and then I will deal with some of the international issues.
Can you please come again? I'm sorry, on that question. I've been trying to turn on my camera. I don't know what happened here.
Okay. Opportunities to influence the Nigerian government to acknowledge the issue of religiously motivated violence and to take any sort of action. I know you do some government relations work. How do you see the possibilities of influencing your government?
Thank you, Jen. As we prepared, one of our key priorities this year, I had a meeting with some of the head of our denominations last month. And we agreed that engaging Nigerian government presently, the current government, on some of these findings. The past few years, it's been difficult because of the absence of facts. When we did we made previous attempts on advocacy with African Service and a few other organizations, the capacity of the Nigerian church or the faith community to articulate the issues was quite minimal. So in the last 3 years, the investment has been more on how to develop that capacity as an alliance, engaging the church leadership. Now, while that was going on, I must confess, we also had an unwilling government, both at the regional level, but a complicit government, not just unwilling. And we are hoping to invest in that this year. This morning, before this meeting, I put a call through to the Christian Association of Nigerian President on this same matter, but we haven't been able to discuss because they are having an executive meeting as we talk. So later today, we are going to talk. We narrowed down on the fact that although the current government at the federal level came in on the Muslim ticket, but we have been able to see possibilities of some dialogues, especially with some of these emerging facts that we can articulate. So yes, that is where we want to build, one of the areas we want to invest this year, especially highlighting the NEP's 60th year. We want to pick some of the key leaders, request for an audience with the president, and present some of these alternative narratives, because that's what we call them, that hasn't been quite projected. And that is where we think the alliance is having an edge. We have tried to create an image that is non-political, so that we will be taken serious. And we're going to pursue that. It's an opening. We know it requires time, it will require resources, it will require high level of networking, but that is where we're channeling our energy. So between now and in the next 2 months or 3 months, we're working towards gathering about 70 to 150 of the key church leaders across the divides, the persuasions, to be able to present some of these facts again, including, driven by this Arise Africa discussion in Nairobi in November last year. And beyond that, if we're able to achieve that, then as a delegation, seek an audience with the leadership of the country, including some at the regional level.
I think that's an important point as well, that it is really valuable to be able to go as a Christian community. It's important that the church be united behind this in order to be able to influence the government. So I think that that's a very important step,
yes,
in government influence.
Thank you, Prof.
So some of the work that I do is at the United Nations, and I think it's fair to say we're in a bit of time of uncertainty and a little dislocation within the international system, with the change in the American government and a variety of new ways of doing things. And so, one of the questions was, what governments does the Nigerian government listen to? It had been one of the governments they had listened to was the U.S. government, and whether the U.S. government will take an interest in the Nigeria issue. Obviously, if the president decides he's going to take action on it, he will take immediate and strong action on it, but he's very tied up with a number of other global conflicts right now. Other governments, it may be still possible through the Commonwealth system, with the countries that are in the Commonwealth to have some influence. But again, I think people are quite distracted by uncertainty about how globalization and how peace building and global conflicts are going to be dealt with. So that's something to be aware of, and those of us who can support Nigeria in any way, to speak to our governments, and if we're not in Nigeria, to speak to our own governments. And if you are in Nigeria, you do have the benefit of a democratic system, so you can speak to your own government representatives about the issues. It's always important in every context for governments to hear from a variety of sources. And the more places that they can hear from them, the more likely they are to take on the issues.
Yeah.
So I think with that, we will wrap up. We have put a number of reports in the chat. Those of you who have registered for this will get a link to the recording when it is available, and also to the report. So thank you for joining us, and I'll let Marcella have the final word.
Thank you very much for joining us in this webinar. If you have any doubts, you can contact me through the email that is in the main invitation of the webinar, mbordon, irs.global. We are going to share the recording of this session through newsletter in a few weeks, so you can share it with your contacts And we invite you to read the report. And if you have any question, you can contact the IRF, and we're going to be very pleased to help you answering all the questions that you have. Thank you very much. We're very sorry for all the questions that we are receiving, that we are not managing to answer all of them. But because of the time, we need to finish the webinar now. So thank you very much for joining us. Let's spread the news of this report, and let's keep in touch to make more initiatives to help Nigeria and to be in touch with this reality and not forget that maybe it's not very close to some of us, but maybe we have a lot to do spreading the reality and the truth of what is going on there. So thank you very much for the speakers and the moderator for joining us. Let's keep in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you,
Have a
everyone.
wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.